The $40 billion quarterly check. Microsoft is writing a $40 billion check for data centers this quarter alone. Yet Azure's operating income is failing to keep pace with the sheer mass of the physical infrastructure bill. For the first time in the AI era, the narrative of infinite scaling is meeting the reality of a $190 billion annual Capex guidance that has the market questioning the underlying unit economics. While the press release will highlight 40% Azure growth, the P&L shows a different story as cloud gross margins have structural downward pressure from accelerating hardware depreciation. Satya is betting the company on a build-it-and-they-will-pay strategy that assumes demand is perfectly elastic, but the cash flow statement suggests the cost of being the world's AI landlord is becoming prohibitive. This surge in capital intensity is the first major crack in the software-as-a-service margin profile that defined the last decade. And the depreciation of these specialized GPU clusters creates a specific kind of accounting gravity. The margin compression trap. Cloud gross margins have slipped from their 70% peak to a messy 66%, a decline directly tied to the rising cost of Blackwell and Rubin architecture components. Microsoft is effectively running on a treadmill where every 10% increase in revenue requires a 15% increase in infrastructure spend to stay competitive. Unlike the commodity server era, these AI accelerators have a shorter useful life, forcing Amy Hood to ramp up depreciation expenses before the hardware even hits peak utilization. This isn't just about building more capacity. It is about the soaring component prices and memory costs that added $25 billion to the 2026 budget without adding a single extra megawatt of compute. The company is trading its historical capital efficiency for a defensive moat that is getting exponentially more expensive to maintain. This capital overhang is now a permanent feature of the balance sheet, and it changes the math on the utilization gap. The utilization gap. Microsoft added nearly 1 gigawatt of capacity this quarter, but the revenue growth signal is muddied by the circular nature of the OpenAI partnership. When one of your largest cloud customers is a company you are also funding, the reported Azure growth includes a significant amount of recycled capital rather than pure market demand. This utilization gap becomes even more visible when you factor in the power grid constraints that are slowing down the time to value for new data centers. Even if Microsoft can buy the chips, they cannot always turn them on, leading to a massive backlog of unfulfilled demand that sits on the books as non-productive capital. This is the $60 billion wall, a massive accumulation of hardware and energy contracts that must be monetized immediately to prevent a total free cash flow collapse. This bottleneck in energy infrastructure is the real binding constraint for the next fiscal year. The real implication. The $60 billion wall confirms that Microsoft has fundamentally pivoted from a high-margin software business to a capital-intensive utility model. By doubling its infrastructure spend while Azure margins compress, the company is signaling that its only path to growth is to outspend every other hyperscaler on the planet, regardless of the near-term impact on free cash flow. We are moving away from the era of lean software scalability and into a period of industrial-scale competition where the winners are decided by who can endure the lowest return on invested capital for the longest time. For operators and investors, this means the software premium on Microsoft stock is evaporating, replaced by the valuation multiples of a telecommunications giant or a power utility. The real test is no longer about Copilot adoption or seat counts. It is whether the Azure revenue per megawatt can eventually stabilize before the next generation of hardware renders this $190 billion investment obsolete. Watch for the Q1 2027 guidance on component pricing as the primary indicator of whether this margin compression is a seasonal dip or the new normal. Subscribe for more.